I tried a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Platinum using only ground types. Ground types are without a doubt one of my favorite types of Pokemon. What they lack in speed, they make up for in solid defenses and raw strength. However, there are plenty of challenges for ground types in this game, including the fact that I can only use 3 ground types for the first 3 gyms. One slip up could cost the entire run, especially in a hardcore Nuzlocke, where we have to catch the first ground type we find in each route, every feint equals a death, level caps are in place, battle mode is on set, and no items are allowed in battle. Before we begin, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It'll help me out a ton as I continue to make these videos. With all that said, let's see if I can beat Pokemon Platinum as Zerna the Ground Trainer. Even though there are many strong encounters for us, this hasn't exactly been the easiest challenge for me. Full disclosure, what you're watching now is attempt number 6 of this run. While doing this challenge, I was debating whether or not to keep making hardcore Nuzlocke videos, or just to keep this as an off-screen hobby, hence why I don't have comprehensive footage of earlier attempts. But while in the middle of this run in particular, I was inspired to get back into content creation, so this run will always be special to me. Fortunately, we're able to keep our starter in the form of Basil the Turtwig. He's not a ground type now, but in 27 levels, he'll obtain that precious ground typing. We beat our rival Skylar with the power of Basil, and then carry on our way. Our next encounter is in the form of Nutmeg the Geodude in Oreburgh Gate, and Coffee the Onyx in Oreburgh Mine. Funny enough, in my very first attempt of this run, I actually wiped while trying to catch the Onyx. Onyx has bind, so I was trapped in and killed before I got the chance to catch it. Thankfully that never happened again. With my 2 new encounters, it's time we bid farewell to Basil for now, and before we know it, we've made it to the first gym. Despite having 2 encounters at our disposal, Nutmeg is all we're gonna need. Gen 4 introduced an incredibly useful move that will be utilized at different points in the run, Rock Polish, which raises our speed by 2 stages. I set one up while Roark sets up a Stealth Rock with his own Geodude. I also taught Nutmeg Rock Smash, so practicing some betrayal on his own species, I smashed the Geodude for a quarter. Meanwhile, he just misses a rock throw. A second Rock Smash brings Geodude into the red, and gets the defense drop. And this time, he lands a rock throw for a smidge of damage. Roark will heal, but I decide to go for a defense curl to help with the Cranidos later on. I then go for another Rock Smash to bring Geodude low, and he gets off another rock throw. One more Rock Smash finishes it off. Nutmeg raises to level 15, which is okay according to my personal rules, and he acquires Magnitude. Roark's Cranidos comes out next. I decide to just go for a Magnitude, and Quick Claw actually activates. Wasn't necessary here, but there isn't much else in the way of held items at this point in the game, so it kinda felt like, why not? He rolls a Magnitude 7, which actually is just enough to take out the Cranidos in one hit. Nice. Last up is Onyx, and again I roll a Magnitude 7, but due to Onyx's high defense, it doesn't quite cinch the kill. So Onyx just goes for Screech. I then go for Rock Smash while Roark heals, and we manage to get a critical hit and a defense drop. It's safe to say that Roark just throws in the towel at this point, as we land one more Rock Smash, finishing off his last Pokemon and giving us our first gym badge. We can only get one more encounter before the second gym, but it's going to be a very important encounter for that gym. By utilizing the honey trees, and with enough patience, we catch ourselves a Burmy, naming it Cumin. A female Burmy can evolve into 3 different Wormadam types while keeping its bug typing: Trash Cloak for Steel, Plant Cloak for Grass, and Sand Cloak for Ground. The form that Burmy evolves into depends on the cloak that it's wearing upon evolution, influenced by its environment. By training it in one of the caves, it receives the Sand Cloak, therefore evolving into the Bug Ground type Wormadam. At Valley Windworks, Mars's Perugly can't do too much against my rock types, so after wrapping that up and carefully making our way through Eterna Forest, we arrive in Eterna City. You can already see the upcoming problem we have here: a grass-type gym with ground-type Pokemon. For some reason, before starting this challenge, I thought you had access to Gligar before fighting this gym, but I was wrong about that. So this is up to Cumin the Wormadam. Let's see what Gardenia has in store for us. She leads with Turtwig, and I lead with Coffee. Now, this is the unfortunate part. I need to get damage off to the Cherim and Roserade in the back with Stealth Rock, but Coffee is the only one that can learn Stealth Rock and outspeed the Turtwig, when Nutmeg can't. So sadly, I have to let Coffee set up the Stealth Rocks, and then watch as he goes down to a Grass Knot. Rest in Rebel, soldier. With that, it's time to set the stage for Cumin. She comes in and chows down the Turtwig like a pack of peanuts. I really lucked out with an adamant nature on this one. Next up is Cherrim, who receives a tick of damage from the Stealth Rock. Then I go for Bug Bite, which leaves it with just a sliver. With a few exchanges of Bug Bites and Magical Leaves, the Cherrim eventually falls, leaving Cumin with 35 HP. Last up is Roserade, and her Magical Leaf brings Cumin low, but procs her Oran Berry. I then go for Bug Bite, which allows us to steal the Roserade's Citrus Berry and gain back some HP. Now, the last thing that has to be done is to dodge one more crit. Can we do it? Yes, we can. Cumin lives and fires off one more Bug Bite for the KO and victory. With a new level cap, Nutmeg is able to evolve into first a Graveler, and then through a trait evolution, he evolves into an almighty Golem. Even then, we still had a pretty close call with Saturn in Intergalactic Building, but thankfully we made it out without any deaths. Saving the bike shop owner grants us what we need to access Route 206 in order to find a rather crucial encounter for us, a Gligar. I've never played with Gliscor before, so I'm really excited about this. I catch it and name it Turmeric. Interestingly, in Platinum we're also able to catch a Gible at this point, but since it has Dragon Rage, I decide to skip that for now. Before we know it, we've made it to Heart Home City. Even though I've played Diamond, Brilliant Diamond, and Shining Pearl a bunch of times, this is my first time playing Platinum, which means this is my first time doing this gym puzzle. And I'd be lying if I said this didn't stress the out of me. It's time to face Fantina, who I wiped to in a previous attempt, until I found what might be the most viable strategy. She leads with Duskull, and I lead with Turmeric. Turmeric's job is simple: spam Sand Attack. I'm able to get off 3 of them while avoiding each of her Will-O-Wisps, even though I do get hit by a Future Sight by the end of it. From there, I switch to Nutmeg while her Duskull just sets up another Future Sight. I have to set up 2 Rock Polishes in order to outspeed her Miss Magius, so I go for a first one while the Duskull annoyingly lands a Will-O-Wisp, even though I came prepared with the Rostberry. I go for my second Rock Polish, and then this son of a Bibarrow lands a second Will-O-Wisp. After all the bad rep that Will-O-Wisp accuracy gets, I was so annoyed she landed 2 of them after 3 Sand Attacks. Oh well. At the very least, we managed to dodge the Future Sight attack. I have no other choice, so I execute my grand plan, Rollout. Even though, of course the first one misses. Not a great start. She goes for another Future Sight, then on the next turn I finally land my first Rollout. One miss here could ruin my entire strategy. Thankfully, we land enough rollouts to take out the Duskull, while only receiving burn damage and avoiding the Duskull's attacks. Next up is the real threat, Miss Magius. With Magical Leaf, this thing can easily wipe out Nutmeg in one hit, hence the Rock Polish setups. This is where I hope that we've accrued enough rollout turns even with a burn, and we managed to take it out in one hit. Last up is Haunter, and it goes for Sucker Punch for some decent damage, but Nutmeg is still on a roll and lands the final rollout for the KO. Absolutely phenomenal performance from Nutmeg there. The early game is definitely one of the trickiest parts of a ground type run for this game, because at this point a bunch of new encounters open up for us. For starters, God that was terrible, Basil the Turtwig finally evolves into Torterra, and then some other encounters include a Shellos named Oregano that evolves into Gastrodon, a Wooper in the Great Marsh named Time which evolves into Quagsire, a Barboach named Cayenne which evolves into Whiscash, a Rhyhorn that we catch on Route 214 named Cilantro, and finally, a Hippopotas in the Ruined Maniac Cave that we name Coriander. Hippowdon is such a great Pokemon, so I'm glad we're able to use this. Before most of those encounters though, we obviously have to take care of our rival Skylar. I decide to level Basil up to level 32 when he evolves, just so I'm able to use him for this battle, while obviously avoiding to go over the same level cap of 32. After that, we reach Veilstone City, which will become an excellent resource of held items and TMs between the department store and Game Corner. The most exciting part of all, by going down to Route 214, I can pick up a Razorfang, one which held by Turmeric and leveled up at night, can evolve into the powerful Gliscor. Look at that devilish flying scorpion thing. We've reached our next major challenge, Maylene. She leads with Meditite and I lead with Coriander the Hippopotas, who sets up the sand automatically due to his Sandstream ability. Side note here, playing with a Sandstorm team is really fun. It makes me want to try playing with other weather teams moving forward. Anyways, I go for a Protect just to get some Sandstorm chip on the Meditite, even though I realize that it's kinda pointless because she just goes for a Drain Punch in the next turn. Regardless, we use Yawn to help put the Meditite to sleep. I go for Protect on the next turn simply to block the Meditite's oncoming attack and watch it fall asleep. Then, I switch over to Basil while Meditite takes their guaranteed first turn of sleep, I set up a Swords Dance, and the Meditite actually wakes up and gets a crit on the Drain Punch.
However, I attached the leftovers on Basil, which can be thieved from wild munchlax in the honey trees, so on the next turn, I take out her Meditite with a deadly Earthquake. She sends in Lucario next, and I'm faced with the potential threat of paralysis as she uses Force Palm, but thankfully doesn't get it. A +2 Earthquake then easily takes it out, and Basil actually manages to outspeed her Machoke and take it out with Earthquake, handing us our victory. After the battle, we're able to evolve Coriander into a beastly Hippowdon, giving us one of our quintessential players in this run. From there, it's a straight shot to Pastoria City as we face our next challenge, Crasher Wake and his Water-type gym. This one is definitely tricky to figure out between his leading Gyarados and his Floatzel with Ice Fang of all things, but with my best plan I've come up with, let's see how this goes. He leads with the Gyarados, and I lead with Coriander. We set up the sand and use Protect for Sandstorm Chip. The next step of the plan is to go for Yawn, but before then Gyarados uses Waterfall, even though I came prepared and attached a Pasho Berry to reduce the damage of the attack, but he gets flinched. I honestly didn't account for that, but it kinda messes this plan up. A critical hit Waterfall will kill Coriander, and I'm definitely not ready to give him up yet, so I switch in Time the Quagsire as he tanks a Waterfall. I then try to go for Yawn with Time, but his Gyarados gets another flinch with Bite. At this point, I decide to switch to the offensive and try to go for an Electric-type Natural Gift off of a Wakan Berry, but his Gyarados gets a freaking critical hit with Brine and finishes Time. This is some of the worst RNG I've experienced, but I guess I'd rather get it out of the way now. Rest in peace, Time. I decide to switch to Oregano and keep chipping away at Gyarados with Water Pulse. Unless of course he flinches us with Waterfall. This is easily the most annoying Gyarados I've ever battled in my life. At the very least, I gave Oregano leftovers, so I'm able to get some recovery between that and Protect. Thankfully, by some miracle, we dodge a flinch on the next turn and land a Water Pulse. I use Protect again, both for some leftovers recovery and for Sandstorm Chip on the Gyarados, then I switch over to Basil who brushes off a Waterfall. Basil is actually deceptively speedy, because he moves first and uses Razor Leaf, which Gyarados was just in the range for a KO. Good riddance. Crasher Wake then sends in Floatzel with Ice Fang, so I switch to Cayenne the Whiscash to take the hit. On the next turn he goes for Crunch while I roll for a Magnitude, and it's a Magnitude 8 which brings Floatzel to half. Unfortunately though, this means Floatzel recovers some HP with its Citrus Berry. The Floatzel goes for Crunch again, which gets a defense drop, then we go for Magnitude again and roll a Magnitude 7 which brings Floatzel over half. From there, I decide to tempt fate and go for another Magnitude, Floatzel goes for Crunch, and we survive on 24 HP. Magnitude comes out, and it's a Magnitude 7 which is enough to take it out. Our two biggest threats are behind us now as his final Pokemon comes in, Quagsire. I simply switch over to Basil on an oncoming Water Pulse, but thankfully no confusion. From there, a Razor Leaf cleanly takes out the Quagsire, handing us our victory even at the expense of our second death. After that, I finally backtrack to Wayward Cave where we can get our penultimate encounter, a Gibble which we catch and nickname Ginger. He's also rocking a nice, modest nature. Nice. We handle some Team Galactic shenanigans and question why the most powerful trainer in the entire region has us run errands for her, and then we eventually arrive in Celestic Town, which is actually home to the Wise Glasses, Black Glasses, and Choice Specs items. There, we battle Cyrus for the first time, and he doesn't seem to give us too much trouble since his Pokemon aren't fully evolved yet. Completing this grants us the Surf HM, which allows us to reach Candice City. We also have our rival fight against Skylar, which normally I would consider to be a pretty tricky fight, but with Turmeric the Gliscor on our side, I don't think Skylar ever stood a chance. By taking a detour to Iron Island, we were able to acquire the Strength HM as well as a crucial item for us, the Protector. That'll come in handy soon enough. The next gym leader is Byron, and I know he never is a serious threat, but that's especially the case in this run. I start off with Oregano against his lead Magneton, and they use Metal Sound to sharply lower our special defense while we go for Mud Bomb despite the 85% accuracy, and thankfully we land it for the 4x effective KO. Next up is Steelix, and it sets up a Sandstorm which will provide a special defense boost to the Bastiodon in the back, but doesn't do much favor for the Steelix as it gets taken down with one Surf. Bastiodon then comes out and just uses Taunt. I go for Mud Bomb for the 4x effectiveness, and it puts Bastiodon to over half thanks to the Sandstorm. Oregano then shrugs off a Stone Edge as he goes for Mud Bomb to take out the Bastiodon once and for all. Nice and easy sweep from Oregano. I think my Pokemon are getting a little too excited with their new Earthquake moves. With the new level cap, Cilantro is able to evolve into Rhydon, and then by trading him with the Protector item, we're able to get a Rhyperior who is an absolute monster. Or a pocket monster, yeah. Also, something clutch I realized about Cilantro is that he has the Solid Rock ability, which reduces the amount of damage done by super effective hits, certainly more helpful to us than Lightning Rod. I gotta tell you, trekking my way up to Snowpoint City with the threat of ice types along the way was some of the most intensive route planning I've ever done. At the very least, we're able to pick up our final encounter for the run, a Swinub which we nicknamed Beef. Surely enough though, we safely make it to Snowpoint City, just in time for us to do more intensive planning with the Ice-type gym. Again though, luckily no casualties. Except, just kidding, we make it through safe. Before taking on Candice, I level up Beef and evolve him into Piloswine, and then by using a heart scale found back in Orbrick City, we're able to have him relearn Ancient Power, which upon leveling up allows him to evolve into the colossally powerful Mamoswine. Candice herself can be really tricky, especially with a type disadvantage. The idea of her Frostlass dodging everything between her Snowcloak ability and Double Team is terrifying, but ultimately I think I came up with a pretty good plan. Let's see how it goes. She leads with Sneasel, and I lead with Coriander. I run the usual strategy of protecting on the first turn for some chip, then Sneasel uses Ice Shard on the next turn which manages to crit, but it doesn't really matter much. I land a Yawn, then immediately on the next turn switch to Cilantro. Sneasel uses Ice Shard again, thankfully no crit, and then she falls asleep. From here, it's time to set up. I taught the Rock Polish and Sword Stance TMs to Cilantro, so I used Rock Polish once and Sword Stance twice, but then I psyched myself out and wondered why Sneasel was still outspeeding me, therefore going for another Rock Polish, but then I remembered it was because the Sneasel's Ice Shard was a priority move. So she lands one more before I take the second Rock Polish. I go for return, and surprisingly she doesn't use Ice Shard again, so a +4, 102 base physical attack is more than enough to take it out. While leveling up, Cilantro actually learns Stone Edge, which I teach him in replacement of Sword Stance, though that doesn't really matter much here. Next up is Abomasnow, who sets up the Hail, but Cilantro is too fast and too strong for the Abomasnow to withstand a +4 return. Piloswine also falls to a return, and then finally her Frostlass comes out. I actually gave Cilantro the wide lens to boost his accuracy by 10%, plus taught him Shadow Claw, so I go for it, and we land the Shadow Claw, which immediately KOs the Frostlass. I'll certainly take a deathless victory over the Ice-type gym. Once again, with a new level cap comes a new evolution, as we're able to evolve Ginger the Gabite into the thing of 10-year-old's nightmares, Garchomp. Next up, it's time for the climax of Cyrus's plot to control time and space in order to recreate his own interpretation of Space Jam, and with this being my first time playing Platinum, I have to navigate through the Distortion world to reach the final battle with him and quash his loony dreams. I decide to spread out the HMs necessary amongst a few of my team members, which ended up working out pretty well. This Cyrus battle is one of the toughest boss battles in the entire franchise, and with new threats like a fully evolved Weavile and Gyarados, I knew we were going to face some challenges, and maybe even some losses. Without further ado, let's do this. He leads with Houndoom, and I lead with Coriander, simply to set up the sand. I immediately switch to Oregano on a Will-O-Wisp, even though thankfully he misses. On the next turn, he goes for Dark Pulse for some damage before I use Surf to cleanly take him out in one hit. He then sends out Gyarados, and I use Protect for some Sandstorm chip, and then on the next turn he uses Waterfall for some pretty significant damage, but thankfully no flinch. I taught Oregano Ice Beam, so I use that for some damage, and amazingly he gets frozen. After all the bad RNG luck I had with the previous Gyarados, this feels pretty great. Once again I use Protect for Sandstorm chip and some Leftovers recovery, and thankfully the Gyarados remains frozen solid as I bring in our new Garchomp and outspeed to kill Gyarados with Dragon Claw on the next turn. Next up of course though, is his Weavile. I switch over to Beef the Mamoswine as he takes an Ice Punch. Then I switch over to Cilantro thinking he'll go for Night Slash, but he went for Ice Punch again. I did have a Yachi Berry to reduce the damage of the super effective hit, but of course I get frozen. I guess the freeze RNG works both ways. This obviously isn't great. Feeling like I'm running out of options, I switch to Oregano to tank another Ice Punch, and rack up more Sandstorm chip between that and using another Protect. At this point, I'm feeling like I'm gonna need a sacrifice, and although it sucks since we just got him, I decide to bring in Beef. Weavile actually goes for Night Slash, which very thankfully doesn't crit, therefore activating our Citrus Berry. I have no choice here, so I go for an Earthquake as he goes for Ice Punch, and Beef survives on 14 HP. We then go for Earthquake, which from this range is enough to take down the Weavile. I actually decided at the last minute to give Beef a Citrus Berry for this fight, and I'm very glad I did. This isn't over yet though, because next he sends in Honchkrow. I try to switch to Cilantro just to see if we can thaw out after taking a Night Slash, but no dice. I go to Coriander, who I know can take some hits, and actually go for Crunch just to get some damage off. So that, along with Sandstorm Chip, bring Honchkrow to just over half before I bring Ginger in. And amazingly, Honchkrow misses Night Slash due to Garchomp's Sand Veil ability. From there, a Dragon Claw is enough to take out the Honchkrow. Last up is Crobat, and annoyingly he gets off a Confuse Ray, which causes us to hit ourselves in confusion. We do manage to land a Dragon Claw after Crobat brings us to over half with an Air Slash. Not wanting to risk a critical hit or confusion, I switch over to Turmeric, who gets hit with Confuse Ray, but I attach the Lumberry, which cures it. On the next turn, Crobat just says screw it and goes for Air Slash, and with no flinch we're able to land one final Aerial Ace for the victory. I straight up didn't think we were going to get out of that deathless, but I'm glad that Beef gave an incredible performance. After the battle, I do the bravest and most noble thing that any trainer would do when facing down a Giratina. Then we leave the Distortion world as we make it back to Distortion reality and find ourselves at Sunny Shore City. Going into this fight, I had absolutely no idea how I was supposed to beat an Electric-type gym leader with a Ground-type team. It seemed impossible to figure out. So you can only imagine that when I came up with the unique, innovative, and brilliant strategy of putting Jolteon to sleep, switching to Cilantro, setting up Rock Polish, and one-shotting each of Volkner's team members with Earthquake, that I felt like a bona fide genius. I didn't know how we were going to get out of that, but at least the worst is behind us. We make it through Victory Road with no major difficulties, and before we take on the Elite Four, our rival Skylar challenges us one last time. Although with a team edged close to the level cap of Lucian's Gallade, we didn't face any real problems. After grinding everyone up and acquiring all the necessary TMs and items, allow me to introduce you to the Elite Four team. Turmeric the Gliscor, Ginger the Garchomp, Beef the Mamoswine, Coriander the Hippowdon, Oregano the Gastrodon, and our starter, Basil the Torterra. Do our ground-up besties have what it takes to finish this challenge? Let's find out. The first Elite Four member is Aaron, who definitely suffers from the level disadvantage, but ultimately it doesn't matter too much. Against his lead Yanmega, I start off with Turmeric the Gliscor, who's holding the leftovers. I set up 2 Sword Stances while Yanmega gets off an Air Slash and 2 Double Teams. But the thing about Double Team is that Aerial Ace doesn't care for it. Yanmega goes down in 1 hit, Drapion goes down to a Dig, which I taught to Turmeric, so does Scizor, and the rest of his team goes down to Aerial Aces. Next up is Bertha, a fellow Ground-type expert. I start with Basil, who uses a Razor Leaf against her leading Whiscash, which goes down in 1 hit. Her Gliscor comes out and threatens with Ice Fang, so I switch over to Oregano, who takes the hit, but gets frozen. Good thing I attached an Esper Berry. On the next turn, she uses Earthquake for some decent damage before I cleanly take it out with a 4 times effective Ice Beam. Next up is her Hippowdon, so I switch in Coriander for a Hippo on Hippo Showdown. A Hippo down? Hippo Showdown do Hippo. After Leftovers recovery, I use Yawn to start the process of putting Hippowdon to sleep, then I switch to Basil, who takes an Earthquake reasonably well. From there, a Miracle Seed boosted Grass Knot is enough to take out the Hippowdon in 1 hit. Her Golem and Rhyperior both fall to 4 times effective Grass Knots apiece, handing us the victory. I'd love to say that Flint was at least somewhat of a challenge for my team, but let's just say that he was dealt with in a very similar fashion to Volkner. The last Elite Four member is Lucian, and for this I lead with Ginger against his Mr. Mime, where I proceed to set up 3 Sword Stances while the Mr. Mime gets off a Psychic and sets up screens. But the thing about screens is that Brick Break doesn't care for them. Ginger then proceeds to sweep all of Lucian's team with Earthquakes and a Brick Break against the Bronzong. Last but not least, we have Cynthia, the champion herself. And I gotta say, it feels like a sort of poetic justice to face against her with a Garchomp. Against her Spirit Tomb, I'm able to set up 2 Sword Stances while gaining passive recovery with Leftovers. Then her Spirit Tomb goes down to an Earthquake. Next up is her own terrifying Garchomp. At this level, there's a chance our Garchomp will outspeed us, and if she does, then the Dragon Rush will 100% kill Ginger, assuming it hits. Everything could change drastically depending on who moves first. So I hit Dragon Claw, and we indeed move first, therefore taking out her biggest threat in one fell swoop. From there, every single one of her other Pokemon are outsped and killed by either Earthquake or Dragon Claw, therefore handing us the title as champions of the Sinnoh Pokemon League. I realize that a setup sweep with a Garchomp isn't the most noble way to beat this Nuzlocke, but for context, in attempt number 5 of this run, I wiped to Cynthia. The reason was because even though I could have done a setup sweep like what you saw here, I tried a strategy that didn't utilize any setup, just to make it a little more interesting. However, that obviously backfired. Granted, I definitely could have played that strategy a little better, and it is possible to beat Cynthia without setup, but having played through the entire game just to wipe at her, and then play through the whole thing again, I allowed myself to take the safe route. And actually, I'll provide an unlisted link to a video where I show you the strategy I tried to use in attempt 5, and show you where mistakes were made and how I theoretically could have beaten her without any setup. Regardless, I had a blast with this challenge. A ground-type monologue is something I tried to complete previously on BDSP, to no avail, so it feels really good to claim this victory. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel for more hardcore Nuzlocks from me. My name is Zerna, and I'll see you in the next challenge. Showdown, po down, hippo show, show po, hippo showdown of down. Hippo!